Thanks everyone for tuning in to WWULive, Building a Data Culture with Nonprofit Hub. My name is Meredith Esquivel. I'm the digital marketing whaler at Whole Whale, a digital agency that leverages data and tech to increase the impact of nonprofits. I'm joined by our chief whaler, George Weiner, and Nonprofit Hub's publisher and executive director, Randy Hawthorne. Thank you both for joining us today, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. A few logistical notes before we start. We will be recording the webinar and sharing the resources after today, but please share any questions you have along the way in the chat. We'll be sharing some resources there, and we will also leave time at the end for Q&A. So with that, I will pass the mic over to George.
Oh, thanks so much, Meredith. And moving through, this is who we are over at Whole Whale and our friends at Nonprofit Hub. Randy, thanks for joining us. Do you want to give us a quick brief on what you guys are up to?
Hey, thank you for having us. Super excited to team with Whole Whale today on this project. We are getting ready for, our year-end stuff. We've been working at that for a little bit. And of course, our nonprofits have, we can tell fall has started. Nonprofit industry is back abuzz with all the things that they need to get done by the end of the year. So this is a perfect timing to be presenting them with this information so that they can consider getting deeper into data in 2018.
Brilliant. And the format of today will pretty much go along our thread of going high level, understanding what a data culture is and talking about it. And Randy, you're going to be jumping in at different points and maybe having a bit of a dialogue. Please share your questions in the chat, and we'll surface those up. And really, we're here to make sure that you can go from 0 to 1 or maybe 1 to 2 with regard to implementing a bit more data into the decision-making and action of your organizations. And that's really what Whole Whale is about. We're about leveraging data and tech to help social impact organizations increase their impact. It's where we live, aka where we swim, if you will. And we really enjoy this stuff. We've written a ton of content. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that we get a chance to geek out with you all here, talking about data culture, the what and why, how data drives impact, how to build a data culture in your organization, breaking it down into 3 components: people, process, and product. Finally, ending with the killers of a data culture. All right, big slide, lots of words. Look, this is a concept where we're merging data and culture, the idea that it takes people integrated with data, working with it, adding it to their actions. And so in our ecosystem here, this is how we're defining a data culture at the bottom, an organization that asks, what do the data say? Act on the results, even when convention or tradition may disagree. It's using an analytic process to leverage relevant big data insights to transform the way that business is done internally and externally. The culture depends on staff. And I'll say that again, the culture depends on the staff at all levels to measure outcomes and act based on available data and build on existing knowledge over time. So lots of words in there, but you get it. It's more than a dashboard up on the side of the wall when you walk in the organization. It's more than the quarterly or annual report saying, hey, here are numbers, we look at them. It's built into the levels that the staff are working on. Alrighty, here's the case for it. Why a data culture? Well, it should be no surprise that big data is growing in volume and importance. 2.5 quintillion bytes per day are created daily. It's nuts. That's a little redundant there, but 90% of the data in the world has been created in the last 2 years. So you're clearly on an exponential curve here, and it's pretty daunting. Next big piece here is data is passive, and it takes people to make it active. That's the culture element. It takes our questions. It takes our vision to make the change and guide it. Data is really a compass sitting on a table. The compass doesn't do much. Finally, data helps humans do the job better. Here's a quick thought for you. The best chess player in the world. You may be thinking, oh, it was the Kasparov Deep Blue and then the computers won. Well, actually, currently in the world, the best chess player is a human-assisted machine. It's a person working with a machine in order to produce the best possible player. So human-assisted machine learning is where we're going, and this is just as much to say as there's still a place for people. hopefully you don't feel too threatened. In other words, data smash. This is part joke, but also a scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, the bone is the data. We're able to use it as a tool. Not using it would be silly. Not using it would mean we wouldn't be able to do the most good or leverage the greatest impact with regard to the causes we work on. So, you know, this is a point that hopefully is beginning to make sense. I mean, you're dialed in and you're listening to us right now. So clearly you understand that there's a bone in here. There's a pony in here to find that we can use. Another piece that we've seen in trends, which is interesting, albeit big data is growing in size. In concept, you can see it sort of peaks here out in 2000, and you can't see the numbers pretty well, but this is going all the way back. But this is right about, 2015. But the new rise is in machine learning, and that is really operationalizing big data and making that more and more relevant to our organization. So data is finally being better operationalized with the help of machine learning, and I would argue our adoption of it. So it's still relevant. When we're talking about data, it can seem abstract, and here are the 4 V's that will hopefully let you suddenly turn the microscope back on your own organization and consider the areas that we're talking about with regard to the volume. You know, how big in size with regard to bytes or growth, the volume of data internally that we're talking about, the velocity. Are we speaking about real-time data, such as maybe a car dashboard telling us how fast we're going, or is it delayed, giving us longer cycle time between when we find out what's going on? How quickly is it gathered and acted on? So the velocity matters there. Variety, what are the types of data sources, be it structured and unstructured data, qualitative and quantitative? You know, are we surveying the field, or are we looking for literally the number of hamburgers served? And how are we combining? And this is important. How are we combining the different types of data in order to find insights across our organization? Then finally, the veracity, the old GIGO, garbage in is garbage out. If we are not storing information in a structured way, in a sound, consistent manner, look, we're not going to get very many insights out of gobbledygook being shoved into your Salesforce or whatever database you happen to be using. So the question, do you trust the data being collected is important, and designing systems that will, again, consistently save organizational data as you grow. Okay, data culture elements broken into 3 parts: the people, the process, the product. Yeah, alliterations are fun, but I do think it fits nicely into this. And this graphic is representing the weight, right? Where we talk about people, the most important part of the data culture implementation, then process, and then product. This may come as a surprise. You may have logged onto this webinar thinking that, you know what, if only we had the right hammer, all problems would be solved. Those of you who've been in the game a little bit longer realize that a hammer will just sit there unless the right people are using it in the right way. And the same is true for data. So 50% people, 30% process, 20% product. I myself, being the chief whaler of Whole Whale, I am speaking from a broad perspective here. This is not based on analytics, but as perception of working with many different organizations, including DoSomething.org, where I was the CTO for 7 years and saw how important people were in transforming the way the organization used data internally. I want to begin with, when we're talking about people and working with people internally, that we have to start with alignment. And we have to address the digital impact chasm, or impact chasm in general here, where there is a trench between the outcomes, the long-term vision, the what we impact. We want to, improve literacy, decrease prison rates. We want to cure XYZ disease and make peace. Look, then there's this chasm between what we do day to day, making that blog post, creating a stakeholder gathering, providing the service. And we have to address that. And especially difficult in a digital world where, again, you're creating website content. You're saying, how does this relate to our outcome? We're lost, but at least we're making great time is a fantastic way of thinking about the way we see many metrics and data misused inside the organization. Hey, look how many people we reach on this Facebook post. hey, look how many hits, how many page views this particular section of the site is getting. Look how big it's getting. This is this idea that, we're driving really fast, but in the wrong direction when we pay attention to data that are misleading and not addressing the chasm and not building a bridge across the chasm. So how do we do it? How do we build that bridge? We can start with a logic model. Maybe you've seen this before. This example relates to Power Poetry, the largest online platform for teens to share their poetry and hopefully improve their literacy. And when we build it, they care about literacy. Improved literacy, long-term outcome is the goal of creating more poems. The short term for them and the outcome, what we expect to happen, super poets that are posting a lot, number of guides read. When we think about their outputs, what we're making, users, downloads of our materials, the time watched in terms of total time on website materials, number of poems created, and then finally the inputs, the things the team are investing in. That's the content, that's writing the guide, the training videos, social. You get it. And you can architect this saying, hey, there is a direct relationship when we create more content or improve our users to improve literacy because that bridge is built. And then the data matter. Information consumes the attention of its recipients. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. And this quote from Herbert Simon speaks to the fact that we are awash in numbers. Maybe when I was going through the 4 V's, you were thinking about all of the internal numbers that may float back and forth in reporting and organizationally. And unfortunately, it dominates our attention and doesn't really help us focus on the ones that matter. So with regard to good indicators, we are seen in many different books. I'm showing just 2 examples, The Leap of Reason and Smarter, Better, Faster, Charles Duhigg, and there's a number of others, but we're picking hopefully indicators that are measurable and actionable, relevant, time-bound, valid, understandable. We're trying to pin things to a number that we can actually measure over time, helping our teams then align behind it. And I'm going to go further into that. If we're talking about people, we can't ignore the data analysts. We see data analysts as the culture carriers internally. However, they can also sometimes be the bottlenecks. Let's say you don't have a data analyst, but internally, think about it. There's somebody, who you're calling up or you're emailing saying, hey, what are the numbers from the recent campaign? And it's that person who serves potentially as the data analyst or data reporter. And the key here is actually that person in a functioning data culture, that person is more the culture carrier, the person who's rah, giving access, as you can see here by the little triangles with heads, giving access to the direct data that they need to do their work a little bit better and not being a sort of roadblock or gatekeeper saying, hey, your tiny minds can't possibly comprehend these little squares. Only I can do this. This is an important one because it can both be the key to winning and implementing a data culture as well as a blocker. Another piece when working with people inside our organization and how we're getting people to get excited and take action on our data as we move into our process are the KPIs, the key performing indicators, feedback loops. So if I give you, just a number 7, you don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing. Hey, Jenny, how were last week's numbers? And you say 7 and you're like, well, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. If I tell you that previously the week before they were 70, you'd be like, that is a terrible thing. In the same way that we can see in this example. In the example to the left, we see speed limit 30 miles an hour and then a cop hiding behind the piece versus one of these speed signs where it's telling us the exact speed versus what we should be going in there. And maybe it's a surprise, but maybe it's not that. In this example, the radar showing you your speed in comparison, giving you a feedback loop to the road sign is 30% more effective in slowing people down net over time. And some piece of that is, I see my speed, it's maybe way over, I hit the brakes, I slow down, and I realize I'm being monitored and watched, as opposed to I drive by the cop hiding behind the sign, I look over my shoulder as I slowly press the brake and then realize he's not following me, and then I speed up again. So we can build feedback loops for our team. We can say, hey, our target is 10 per week. We seem to be drifting off of that rather than surprise. At the end of the year, you're off your mark by quite a bit. Another tactic with working with people inside of your organization and building a data culture is, what do the right data say? Asking this question, and this is a huge win, and I challenge you, please let me know if it works too. I challenge you to say in a meeting,
Well, I think I'm not seeing a lot of questions yet, but I do have a few for myself, or some observations that I have appreciated so far that you've talked about, because I hear it all the time. People come in and they always, I'm wondering if you see this, they always come to me with tools first. I'm like, whoa. So I'm glad you're pointing that out. I think that's a really important aspect. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is you mentioned some scorecard issues as far as like Facebook likes, et cetera. Maybe talk a little bit about how does an organization decide what to measure? Because I think I see it a lot where, they're proud of measuring something, but it's not necessarily a key performance indicator.
Yeah, the what to measure is huge. And that gets back to that quote, right, that I was talking about. This wealth of information really consumes our attention and can distract us. And that actually moves us elegantly into the process where I can talk through and explain a bit more of the approach, right? Because even the right people in the room sent on a Sisyphean effort or dealing with poorly gathered data won't get us there. And so as we move into process, that is a perfect leading question.
Hey, well, awesome. Sam also had a great question. Well, and this probably will be part of the process too, as we get into it, but just wanted to bring it up to your attention as you go into this. What are the good questions that you might want to ask at a data meeting? And he recognizes that it's going to be different for different organizations, but maybe some examples.
Yeah, I really like that. And you're going to enjoy the process as well. But look, good questions, right? The properly asked question, is a question half solved, as the quote goes. And broad, general, sweeping questions are pretty useless. How is the website doing is like one of my classic, that is a useless question, because I will tell you how your website is doing right now. Your traffic dips on the weekends. It peaks during the middle of the week. Guess what? It's slow on holidays. And the bounce rate is on the homepage probably somewhere between 50 and 70%. And most of your traffic actually comes in through, look, you're going to get generic answers to generic questions. Now, good questions come from segmentation. Good questions come from dialed in to KPIs. I'm trying to increase my email rate. So what was the number one driver of email acquisition in terms of source traffic in the last month? How has that changed this month versus this time last year? Insights from that will actually lead you to, oh my gosh, we forgot to re-engage that partnership with so-and-so because they were driving a ton and we seem to be off our mark. Hopefully that begins to get us there as we wander into the process. Keep asking questions and we'll keep jumping onto them. Oh, can you talk a little bit about generating internal buy-in for establishing a more data-driven culture? Some of our staff are into data, feel comfortable with it, etc., but many aren't. Okay, so the buy-in elements hopefully will come up on process, but keep pushing me on that question because that's the core here. You're in this meeting, you're in this webinar because you already have in some ways bought into this idea. So one of the tactics for getting buy-in is setting measurable goals. And sometimes this has to come from the top, frankly. But we have to prioritize the right metric. Fantastic book, Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? Talks about this Netherlands Olympic team that went from worst to first. And in essence, the team got together in terms of rowing and they said, look, we care about one thing and one thing only. Answering this question about anything that we do, will it make the boat go faster? So should we go out and go on a bender at the local pub? Will it make the boat go faster? No? Okay, not. Should we work on our boat speed rhythm and various? Yes. And so you have to, in some ways, begin to look toward this measurable target that the entire team can get behind and then understand the data that serves as your compass to get you there. Okay, the data to action process, right there, we have ask questions, but it begins with gathering the right data. That's the garbage in, garbage out. We have to make sure that qualitative and quantitative data are being saved and stored relevant to our operations, whether it be in the fundraising department or programs department. We want to make sure that data are being gathered in the right way so that we can ask questions over time and see that change. Next is asking questions and specific questions that drive toward understanding, what are the leading indicators, what are the bigger levers that are helping us reach our goals. Then we jump in and we analyze the data, finding the insights from that particular question. And then ideally, we turn that into some sort of learning for the organization or something that we can act on, implement a new landing page, change something about the way we're delivering programs that make it less confusing or make it easier for people to sign up. And then again, we go around and making sure in this process, it's pretty straightforward. Another way and another framework to consider here for getting that buy-in is establishing the marketing funnel. And this is effective for both the programs team, the communications team, the fundraising team. Please steal this, make it your own, talk about what different departments are doing on either side. In this, you can see it goes from aware, interested, engaged to committed, people that donate or take an action. They're really committed to your organization. And it's the realization that we start off at that aware level where people may know we exist and we're looking at things like impressions or mentions or visits. We move into interested. We're seeing fewer people at this level. And this is, people give us then the permission potentially to communicate with them. Because they're interested, they're giving us their email, they're becoming social followers, they're filling out that web form. And this is where we're thinking, at least with Whole Whale, we're getting our clients to create great content and then tell good stories to pull them in further and then engage, right? They're already on the list. How do we engage them over time? How do we get those 7 impressions so that they're more likely to become a committed donor? And we're helping analyze communications, and on their side, they're creating clear calls to action, campaigns. And this is a great way to see how everyone from the person generating content on the website to the fundraising team all work together. That if they miss the numbers up here, the folks down here won't be happy in 9 to 18 months, whatever your cycle time is. And that, again, builds a bit more of the buy-in, saying, oh, I get it. My number's related to yours is related to yours is related to the organization. Let's make this a bit more practical. Going back to powerpoetry.org, here's an example. And remember, they're a teen poetry platform interested in long-term impact of poetry and literacy for young people. And at the top level on awareness, a team finds Power Poetry online. That's the goal. We want to find them. So it's traffic, off-platform impressions, general awareness of creating poetry. Some of the metrics we are looking at are organic sessions maybe, or video views, social reach, site users by source. As we move down into engagement, we care about people interacting with Power Poetry's content. And this is where we move into potentially poets, like the number of people signed up, the newsletter, maybe a time on page or site of 5 minutes indicating that they really care, downloads or video views or social engagements, seeing how we're defining these. There might be different departments in your organization that are in charge of these different layers. Moving into action, we care about poems created and teachers taking our course maybe. And so poems created, teachers taking trainings, or super poets, which are young people that have created more than 10 poems. And then finally, if we care about, in this case, it's not donations, but long-term social impact change, increase youth literacy, a big heady goal, they all actually relate because this is the qualitative improvement of our super poets, the young people that have been with us. Are we, improving college rates or decreasing prison rates, whatever the net is on that with regard to increased literacy and emotional expression. And you can go from a very, what seems like tangible to a very deep and related impact that goes to our outcome. And that outcome can be donations, the outcome can be whatever you set it to. But this is a framework for you to steal and help with some buy-in. Any more than 3 KPIs, key performing indicators, is a circus from our friend Peter Drucker. And it's the idea that focusing on all of the things means you're focusing on none of them. How can you pick a target if you're trying to choose all of the data points? Similarly building, I think, on that last quote that we talked about. And so in the question to what to measure, because there are so many things, I just threw like a bunch of metrics at you. You're like, I want to measure all of the things. Here is Whole Wheel's framework for having this conversation. And this is, again, a tool you can use if the organization has tons of metrics and potentials for measurement. On the y-axis here, we have importance to the organization from low to high. And then on the x, on the bottom here, we've got measurability from easy to hard to measure. And in this measurability, we then have a line. We want to stay above the line, and we can plot various metrics and KPIs in relationship to the importance to the organization and measurability. Let me make this a bit more practical, though. In this bottom left-hand area, this is where, this makes me mad to use Facebook emojis because we're choosing things that are not important to the organization, but they just happen to be easy to measure, i.e., I log into Google Analytics, and the first thing it shows me is the past 30 days of page views. So like, cool, but not cool. Or just total dollars raised. That really doesn't tell me very much other than a high-level metric, though it may be somewhat important to have the conversation. This makes me sad, bottom right corner, if we're measuring things that are hard to do and have low importance to the organization, like the people's opinion of the price of tea in China because we're dealing with randomness. Top right, this is amazing. This is, the double-blind study, longitudinally done over a couple of years that costs, tens of thousands of dollars. Super cool, but we can't do it every day to guide us as we drive down the road. This makes me the happiest. The things that are of high importance and easy to measure that are related to outcomes, those are real gems. Those are the car, that's the car dashboard with the miles per hour and my fuel tank. I'm like, I know exactly how many gallons I have and how far I can make it and how fast I'm going. Those are delightful metrics. Okay, stay above the line. That's our general goal. Let's look at power poetry again. With regard to importance and measurability, up here in the top left, I'm getting the happiest about my poets and poems ratio, right? I want more young people creating more poems. That's pretty clear. Long-term literacy improvement, that's something that's pretty darn hard to measure, frankly, but it does have high importance. So it's good to note. And in that conversation, why aren't we measuring literacy improvement? That's what we need to do. I don't care about a single metric that I'm showing you in a meeting in a way that you're saying, like, look, I can't give that to you every week. I can't tell how fast we're going if all we can look at is a metric that takes me a year to analyze. Down here on the left, this is like right on the border, but this is content visits. I do care about it. It's of relative importance. And maybe you're thinking, oh my gosh, why did he put it so low? Perfect. That's the conversation. This is the tool. You can say, hey, move that up a couple bits because I do think that's more relevant to our mission or to our department. Let's move that up. And it's a way of having this conceptual conversation about what to measure and how important it is. Fun tool. Another example, Donate Life America, one of Whole Whale's clients, the largest organ donation network in the country. Quick PSA, by the way, statistically speaking, only 52% of you, by the numbers, eligible U.S. humans are registered to be organ donors, yet over 93% of you would probably say you'd accept an organ. There is a delta there. So this is the PSA. Go register to be an organ donor if you haven't already. Okay, Here it is. Look, we care about the organ registry. Are you registering your organs or not? Are you signing up for this registry? And here's an example of something that's in the bottom right. That quick stat of 93%, obviously that was taken probably, I think it was about 3 years ago. They could spend a ton of money measuring the sentiment. How many points has it changed? But frankly, it's somewhere over 90. You could spend a ton of money there, but sentiment matters less than the actual registry going on right now. For the sake of this conversation. And it's a good way to help, executives or stakeholders or board members understand that, like, look, great idea to like measure sentiment. And we should do an annual thing. However, it's not getting us to where we need to go on a day-to-day basis. One more example from my good old friends, DoSomething.org, the largest organization for teens and social cause in the US. Well, look, here's importance measurability. They care about registrations and actions reported by young people taking action online. And then long-term, lifelong volunteerism, social engagement, the secondary impacts of what they're doing. A lot more dots can be put on here, but that's the example of how we can begin to use this as a tool for our organization. The process elements, we want to set measurable goals. We want to be communicating the right data internally and acting on knowledge and insights. If it doesn't make it to the action step, frankly, it's just data puking and it sits there on the table. That's an odd metaphor. Okay. TV timeout while we field some questions. Hopefully I answered a bit more, but Randy, what do we got?
Well, nothing as of yet, but I had some thoughts coming through on this too. I'm wondering if some of our listeners have a similar issue that I run into from time to time, where you get a board member who makes you measure data that isn't necessarily important, and it's not always easy to get to. And how do you deal with that?
Oh gosh, I love it because I am a board member. I have been in a nonprofit, many nonprofits, and been on both sides of that board seat and been like, what about these numbers? And that is, I think, getting back to the framework, frankly. This is the exercise where you can have a very pragmatic conversation about the measurability. If something is that hard to measure and that expensive to measure and may fall not as high on the importance to mission, this is an alignment. This is a tool to get alignment and understanding on, look, we can spend a ton of money on this, but it can't be our day-to-day KPI that drives us. And by the way, it costs 20 grand to do. It makes us a bit more practical and lets you compromise on other ideas, putting it in a framework and giving you the full landscape rather than the myopic view of, hey, I just had this thought, wouldn't it be great if? So this is a good board management tool, as well as the funnel, because you can say, hey, where's the business lever?
Yeah, also I've done some analysis too, where certain granting organizations also require certain KPIs. And I've looked at it and I'm like, well, that cost me equal to what you're giving me.
Oh my God.
So I guess that grant isn't worth the time to go after if we're having to track down numbers that we don't feel are important to our organization, but are important to getting that money.
Randy, that's such a tough one, right? We're talking about the business of philanthropy and their metrics. They're trying to make their numbers. My answer to that is, try to, in terms of the ROI of the numbers, there's two parts, right? Numerator, denominator, in terms of how much does it cost to get that number and how close can I come with half of that budget, and again, you have the dialogue, maybe use this as a tool, show them how you are using metrics, and maybe you can roll something up or shoot it from a different angle, because if you are having to report on numbers that aren't directly related, hopefully you can design systems that aggregate. Let's say it's like the number of fingers of people that you've helped, and like that's the number they care about, and you're like, well, look, we're measuring in classrooms. We don't want to go to your finger measurement. However, you can say, hey, here's our aggregated number and our approach to turning our number into yours. Hopefully that's all right. Here are the assumptions we made in this model, but we feel as though it's within 10% accuracy. And if that's enough, we can move forward. And you may be surprised at how open they are, because they're reporting to their stakeholders. They just need a number sometimes. So it's a tough question and a tough reality for a lot of organizations, but there can be ways of working around it if you're transparent, honest, open about how you're arriving at some of the numbers potentially.
And I just want you to know that some people are enjoying the applied humor that you are providing us today.
Let's just be honest, Randy. We are talking about data on a Tuesday. I gotta come with some jokes. And that's maybe a reminder that like it doesn't have to be zeros and ones and boring, and hopefully bring it a bit alive. I'm gonna move into the next section though. Okay. Here we go. Products, the tools. So this is a fun part, some of the products that we can use that are out there. As I move through products, a big one that I like to focus on, especially at Whole Whale, is Google Analytics. It is the heart of, I'd say, web data for your organization. It's google.com/analytics. It's free. These are web analytics for your website or web properties. It's JavaScript that needs to live on every single page. Every basically website code base can handle it. It takes less than 30 minutes to install. And it shows you the what, where, how, when activities on your website. Not so much the why people are doing what they're doing, but it is a tremendous asset in understanding your online behavior of your users. And it's really that question, what are users doing? Here's a quick example, though. Here's the Bravo Supermarkets over on Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn. Now, without analytics, this is basically our website. We're looking from above. We're like, I think someone went in the store and then came out. Hope they did something good. Here's with analytics. We have the store cam. We can see people wandering around the aisles. And then if you properly configure and understand what your KPIs are, you can actually see this androgynous little family picking out what I think is a pumpkin squash-ish thing. But it's the point of sale. We can see the shopping part. They're about to, make that donation or sign up for our newsletter. And that's why we're configuring things properly. We need to set up goals in analytics inside of the platform to tell Google when you actually score a goal. Otherwise, it'll just be a bunch of people running around kicking a soccer ball on a field without a goal, which is even more boring than the current sport. I'm just kidding. But looking at the goal configurations, I'm going to make this practical. Here is, and you guessed it, Power Poetry's homepage. So inside of here, when we set up Google Analytics, we go in and we can create new goals and goals that track pretty much main clicks, important clicks on the site that suggest somebody's about to take an action that relates to our outcomes, remembering what the outcomes are, which is, more poems and poets. We can add a poem, track that click. Log in, yep, track that click. Sign up, Facebook Connect. Anything pretty much with a submit button, I'm interested in setting up a goal for because I want to tell, who and how they came to the website, what source of traffic, region, and other information that brought that person in, and be able to analyze it, ask those questions of what's driving those numbers. And then we get tidy little numbers for all of them. We can set a goal value if we want. Depending on your donation system, you can even set this up with donation numbers as well, saying, okay, here's the value of the donors coming in or other components on the website. Using these analytics, actually, we were able to find insights that help grow the platform from 0 to 350,000 teen poets in 4 years. With digital strategy services, we were able to build about 200,000 monthly users. Which is pretty incredible because their budget actually, and I happen to know this as co-founder of the organization, their budget is for Power Poetry under 120,000 a year. So it is quite tiny, but they've been able to do a lot by asking the right questions, analyzing the data, and building this online platform. Okay, so using dashboards, I feel like you're not going to make it through a presentation, talk on data without talking about the infamous dashboard. Now, because we love giving away things for free, you can go to wholewhale.com/Google and download Whole Whale's dashboard for Google Analytics that will automatically start you off with a bunch of prepackaged dashboards that look at the executive view, pulling out KPIs and windows into the right data inside of Google Analytics, because Google Analytics is a bit of a maze when it comes to all of the numbers that you can gather inside of there. So you can do that. Here's the example I just talked about, the executive dashboard. And it'll give you things like sessions and users and average session duration, bounce rates. And we try to use English, that crazy language that sometimes data analysts forget, how many people are visiting per day and for how long. The other way of saying this is average sessions and average session duration over time, which you probably just glazed over as I said it. Try to use English. Try to phrase in the form of a question to really pull people into finding the answer. How do people get to our site, aka source, medium by sessions and bounce rate is not the roll off your tongue, engaging mental that is going to get you to someone understanding what these data over here are about to tell you. So consider that because we do it very intentionally when we built these dashboards. The next piece of this is you can actually go up here and export, but also email. You can set this up as a weekly email to yourself or your team, email it to someone who cares at your nonprofit. A quick PSA about this is, people may like this at first, but inevitably they're going to start to ignore your emails as good as they may be as soon as they realize that it's coming in regularly. So you're going to have to become more creative, but building these feedback loops, remember the feedback loops, building these feedback loops for your team will begin to make it a bit more relevant for them potentially. I'm just using, again, the one example of Google Analytics. If you want to broaden this, a tool we really love that is also free, like unicorns, rainbows, and butterflies, is wholewhale.com/data studio. We've built out a template for you to use with Google Data Studio, a free data visualization tool. And so here's an example of it where we see sessions and traffic source and top content pulled from Google Analytics in a much prettier way. This can pull data from other sources as well, though, beyond Google Analytics, from other sources that you can integrate and play with to your heart's content, including not limited to even Google spreadsheets. So you can have pretty unstructured data pulled in and then analyzed. So very powerful tool that you can build a dashboard for. There are tons of these tools, though. Domo and Tableau, if you're willing to spend a few more dollars. But it's a reminder to you that dashboards don't solve everything. Jokingly, spreadsheets might, but they don't. I come back to the people in the process. Simply setting up a dashboard on the side of the wall or setting up a weekly email that goes to your content team is not enough to get there. You really need to consider all of these components and how you're addressing them. Otherwise, it'll simply be, yet another dashboard that rolls across the desk and doesn't get you to action. And that's the whole reason we're doing any of this. We want to improve the impact your organization is having with assist from data and thinking about that. Product elements. All right, so utilize analytics and productivity tools by all means. Follow consistent naming and storage conventions. The garbage in, garbage out, and veracity really depend on the consistency there. I think some people may have mentioned some of the data piece about sharing all of your data openly. You want to make sure you're protecting personally identifiable information internally and definitely externally, meaning don't share people's personal data, but in aggregate and anonymized, you can go forward with that. The internal security audits, making sure that you do limit access to data that have personally identifiable information, however, still allowing people to see aggregate anonymized data so that they can do their own manipulations, their own analysis, democratizing the access to it, and hopefully increasing the comprehension of what the heck people are looking at when it relates to their organization. So, buttons. I'm going to pause again and see if we have any questions or comments.
Someone gave us a big yes.
Terry loving us. Thanks, Terry. So internal buy-in. Okay. Beth,
I'm sorry. I got lost and I was messing with your dashboard a little bit.
The dashboard's amazing. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Now, let me jump on that, Beth. The internal buy-in. Maybe Beth, can you comment real quickly? Where in the organization are you? Are you, CEO? Are you communications team? Are you fundraising team? Communications. I called it. Okay. So the internal buy-in. The comms team in some ways has the hardest, easiest job. It has the hardest job because you see the numbers. Basically, you get to see a very quantified view of your activities, and then it goes through this like smoke filter as soon as you report it out, and people are like, "What do you mean our numbers increased by 20%? I don't see 20% more people here. And you're like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. When you're looking to get buy-in, we need, all right, solid. All right, we got you now. Okay. It's always the communication, folks. Look, we need buy-in from the top. The ideal case scenario for implementing a data culture is that it comes from the top. Now, here are some high-level tactics for you. I find that finding the right books potentially to send leaders can get them, to begin to think about it. One I just read that I think speaks to that high level is How Google Works, Eric Schmidt. And, they talk about how they use objectives and key results. And that organization, people are walking around with shirts that literally say, what do the data say? You can get them thinking through how other leaders are using data. You can pull in examples from competitors in your field. Obviously, not-for-profits have no competitors. We're all frenemies here. But you can use that as an example of, hey, look, here's an example of a webinar of so-and-so using data and how they're applying it. Really setting the macro goal and defining the marketing funnel. That's a very powerful tool because it'll show leaders saying that, hey, guess what? If we double the number of emails on our list over the course of 9 to 18 months, that's going to relate to 2x our value. And number of potential donations or volunteers. The head bone's connected to the neck bone, and by the way, it's in that relationship. The buy-in takes some time, but it is doable through various tactics. It's a good question, though. Oh, great! Look at how quick you guys. How Google works. But Beth, I've got a couple more thoughts. I don't know, Randy. Any responses before I move into my data culture killers / helpers?
Let's get into the killing.
Oh boy, he's like, you haven't even created it yet, you fool. Sometimes it's good to know what the big roadblocks are. So I'm going to fire through these. Data fiefdoms. So if you look up, does your organization have a data fiefdom? You'll end up with our article because we're huge geeks and like writing about this. Fiefdom, going back to feudalism. We have a castle, we have a lord, and this person has been dubbed the owner of this area, and they have a moat around it, and they have their own rules and regulations into how you access things. You can't, this is the sort of data analyst gone wrong where you have the walled garden and no one's allowed in and you have to go through the one person. This is not how you're getting to a data culture. You have not democratized access. And sometimes happens, sometimes under the guise of security, which I do care about. I do think it matters, but we can't let the tail wag the dog when it comes to allowing access to data in accessible ways. It can be done and it should be done. Google data fiefdoms use this as a target to send and say, hey, this isn't me. If you have a potential, data fiefdom inside, this isn't me. This is this really annoying jerk named George who wrote this thing. What do you think? Next up, data squirreling. Data squirreling can kill us. And this is the difference between reporting squirrels versus analysis ninjas. And this is Avinash Kaushik. And if you really want to get into geekdom, like Avinash is the guy. He is the chief evangelist of Google Analytics. He is awesome. I actually got, my dream come true the other year when I got to interview him on our podcast. But here is his post about creating analysis ninjas versus data, and data-driven cultures. The whole idea here is the reporting squirrel simply is the find and grab of the numbers with no manner of analysis done. It's like, hey, what were the numbers from last year? Here they are. Bleh. You sort of data puke them out versus analysis ninja. If you ask the ninja there, what you get is actually year over year. I know you asked for the last year's numbers, but year over year, we seem to be up 10%. However, the trend is going this direction. Our leading source is XYZ. Consider taking this type of action in order to, you kind of get it. You're moving around the gather, ask questions, analyze, find insights, and then act or learn on the data. Otherwise, you are just you're reporting squirrels instead of analysis ninjas. The next killer we have is the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization. And this is an example of the hippo charging. And this is a warning that, if you run up to the CEO seeing, basically holding up the sheet of numbers saying, ha, I was right, you were wrong, this is what's going to happen. The hippo will charge you. They're actually very dangerous. If you see them in the wild, stay the heck away. And this is the eternal gut versus data. I'm right, the data is wrong. And hopefully it's never a versus, it's an addition to. hopefully you're getting alignment. You're making it their idea potentially to run a test. And one of those ways of dealing with the hippo is I'm not quite sure if changing the site to all white so no one can read the text is a good idea. Would you mind if we test it? And we can use tools like Optimizely to do A/B tests or run those types of options. This kind of builds nicely into the Steve Jobs effect. Hence that anytime someone can put on a black turtleneck, they become the all-knowing, all-seeing Steve Jobs who bestowed upon us the greatest innovations by simply saying, let there be iPad, let there be iPhone. And I got to tell you, there was only one guy who could really wear that turtleneck, and it's misused a lot in terms of the net learning about Steve Jobs and the way he used or didn't use data. And if your leader is thinking that, hey, I'm a divining rod in the same way that Steve Jobs knew what the customer wanted, if you don't think Apple is using data, you don't understand how the internet works. If you don't think they're doing, customer controlled experiments to make sure that they're making sure their UX works, you're out of your mind. The Steve Jobs effect is so sadly misused by some leaders. It kind of makes me nuts. And one of the ways that you can approach this is instead saying, what Steve Jobs was doing was similar to what, the Rice moon landing, the Rice moon speech by JFK was talking about. We're going to put a man on the moon inside of a decade. That's what we're going to do. And guess what? A heck of a lot of data went into it. We are going to create and innovate in terms of an iPhone in the market, and we're going to use a heck of a lot of data to build this freaking thing. So, it is not gut versus data. It is gut and data. It is informed by. And hopefully that can begin to help you have the questions here. The questions that you need and the tactics, hopefully, that you need to move forward. In conclusion, I'm talking a lot about this. Data distribution is the key inside of here, making sure people have access, minding the security elements, reminding you all when you're reporting that numbers are people too. How we do talk about numbers internally matters. Here's 3 different ways of shaping the same thing. There were 315 newsletter signups during the month of September, an average of 10.5 per day. Or in September, 10.5 people per day told us they care about the cause and want to hear more about our work. And number 3, during September, 315 people signed up to hear more from us. This should lead to 31 new donors in the next 6 months. Same data, phrased different ways, will evoke different emotional responses. People are people too. I think it's super important that you have all joined us, that you think about the gather, ask questions, analyze. None of this happens. Data sits on the doorstep and does absolutely nothing unless we operationalize it and work toward it. And a final tactic for you is thinking about that emotional element and not just getting lost with the logic center. I'm willing to bet of the people joining us here, many of you find yourself, if you've read Switch, but many of you find yourself on the logic side. I could make an argument based on numbers saying you're going to get a 30% improvement, and that would be enough. You can't ignore, though, the emotional state. You can't ignore the fact that you have to motivate people even though you've told the logic center. And in this relationship, the rider is the logic center of the brain, the elephant is the emotional center, and then we shape the path. But to think that the rider is in complete control of this giant elephant is a huge mistake. So when you craft this example or using your numbers, remember to make the emotional argument. We may have had 315 people sign up last month, but let me tell you about a conversation I had with Jessica. She's actually from Kentucky. She signed up and she said this is the best thing she's ever had. And she has given us her email and is now volunteering, all because we created more content and were able to bring her into the fold. We wouldn't have found Jessica otherwise. Feel the difference between the number and the story, and then say, by the way, I really think we should invest more in our email marketing campaigns, and here's the way we should shape the path. All right. Let's end with any more QAs. We can jump around, share some more stories. But what do we got, Randy?
Well, we'll wait for some of those things to come in. Do you have a potential example of some good data collection that maybe isn't as related to marketing? I know in certain nonprofits, they're required to come up with a scorecard for each of the different departments. Do you have any knowledge around any of that at all?
Sure. So, creating scorecards, really I come back to objectives and key results, OKRs. and look up, and maybe, I don't think we've posted anything, but with regard to OKRs, it's really about making it transparent, the 3 to 5 objectives each individual person or team has, making them measurable. Tons of YouTube videos on this, originally pioneered in originally pioneered at like Intel and the evolution of that. Creating those scorecards can help you with that alignment. Gathering data, first determine what it is you're doing that needs to be measured. Ask as many questions as you need and no more, using consistent tools, obviously like a SurveyMonkey or Typeform, what have you, can really make it a bit easier to do that. Some of the pieces, like for example, we may send up a follow-up, or maybe you do webinars or training like this. So consistent sort of follow-up surveys in terms of impact and being consistent in the questions can matter. And if you give away, say randomly one of you will win $10 Amazon gift card, you're more likely to increase the ROI on people responding. Lots to dig in.
One of the things that I know I do as an organization is, you manage what matters, and you put those things that matter in front of you. And I know that we've changed our scorecard over time. If we've kind of solved one issue and we move on, and we don't, and that particular data piece we are not as concerned with anymore. It's kind of in the background because we made that goal. Is that something that's normal, or should we be consistent always?
Sorry, one more time?
Or should we be consistent always in, these are our 3 scorecard items that we just have as an organization?
Yeah, the organization, you can have a trickle down, and it's, unrealistic to just have, one number to rule them all. I think it's important to subdivide, but make them related. So let's say, for example, with Whole Whale, we care about learning engagements. We want to reach 5 million learning engagements over the next few years. And, Meredith, right now, these numbers, the number of people that have joined us on this webinar are going to count toward that, in the same way that somebody writing an article tomorrow, posting it and having a certain web activity is going to roll into that number. And they have objectives that relate to their own parts of the organization that have content or educational components. And they know that that rolls up into our overall learning engagements for the organizational mission that we have set for that target. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think we've just either answered absolutely every question, or people are just swimming in a in a lot of information that they just got.
Cool. No.
Meredith, do you want to jump in at all?
Yeah, I just have one question that we can have to wrap up this amazing conversation. What are 2 things that anyone on this webinar can go and do tomorrow to start building a data culture at their organization?
2 things that you go out there tomorrow and do. Well, look, we gave you some very quick fire ways of optimizing your Google Analytics. There's some easy wins in there for creating dashboards. Literally, I'm talking about like 15 minutes of work to create some dashboards and present it. And the other challenge is in the next meeting, see if you can drop the lines, what do the data say about this, and see how people choose to answer it.
Awesome. Very actionable next steps.
Yeah, and I think this is, like I said at the beginning, I think this is a perfect time of year as you're starting to set your strategy for first quarter next year. If you're not looking at data, this is a great time to make that one of your goals and do it. Start looking at it.
All right. Well, thank you so much to George and Randy for today. This has been an amazing conversation. For more Whole Whale resources, check out our website and our course and podcast, where you can hear more from George. And check out Nonprofit Hub's resources too, because they have amazing ones as well. And I'll be sharing those as well as the deck and the recording after today. Thanks everyone for tuning in.